Welcome, everyone. Thank you to everyone who is here. We appreciate you participating. Today's webinar is the National Transit Database NTD reporting for state DOT's report year 2018 webinar. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. Today we are pleased to have Bailey Krouse and Erik Chadwell as our presenters. Bailey Krouse joined the NTD team in 2014. She is a graduate of the Michigan State University and currently serves as Validation Manager for the National Transit Database Rural Reporting Module. Erik Chadwell joined the NTD team in 2016. He is a graduate of the James Madison University and currently serves as a validation analyst for the Rural Reporting Module of the National Transit Database. For today's webinar, Bailey and Erik will present the material, and we will have a question and answer session at the end. Everyone can participate in the Q&A by using the chat pod located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, right where it says chat. I'll be monitoring this, as will, I guess, Bailey and or Erik, whoever's not speaking at the time, and we will keep track of your questions and try to make sure everything gets answered, at the very least addressed at the end. If you haven't printed out a copy of the presentation, you can download the handout. Oh, it has the wrong heading on it. Okay, so it says handouts, it says tribal populations, but that's not what this is. I'll fix that in a second. You can also use the links that appear. Wow, I'm sorry. These pods have not the correct title on it. So above the chat where it says notes for MERT Part 1, I will fix that. There are links in there for the correct handouts, so you can access those. If you need any additional help, my colleague Andrea Lambert can be reached at andrelam@nti.rutgers.edu, and she will be happy to assist you. I will now turn the presentation over to Erik.
Thanks, Lori. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Transit Database webinar for state reporting. My name is Erik Chadwell, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to cover a lot of material related to completing the annual report and using the online reporting system. As this is an extensive presentation, if you have any questions during, please ask them through the chat pod, and we'll attempt to answer them as they come in. In addition, we'll continue to answer any questions afterwards with time permitting. Here's the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you need any general or technical assistance while completing your report, please reach out to the help desk between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, my name is Erik Chadwell. I'm an NTD validation analyst, and here's my contact information, along with our other presenter, Bailey Krouse, and her contact information. We're going to cover several topics during this webinar. We'll start with an overview of NTD as a whole, go through clarifications on the new changes for the 2018 report year. We will review user interface and account management in the system. We will provide an overview of the report and how it starts, including reporting data to each of the annual report forms, along with any validation issues, and we will finish with the submission and closeout processes. First, we're going to discuss an overview of the rural module within NTD. The National Transit Database was established by Congress in 1974 as a means to collect information and statistics on transit agencies. This data is used in FTA's biennial report on the nationwide capital investment needs for public transportation. The NTD data is also compiled and published annually for the general public to view and utilize. Entities that benefit from FTA's 5311 program, including states, tribes, and territories, must report to the NTD. This also includes subrecipients of direct grantees. Additionally, previous subrecipients of 5311 who have not reached the end of the required reporting period must report. So for example, if an agency purchases capital with 5311 funds, that agency must continue reporting to NTD throughout the useful life of that capital purchase, regardless of whether they continue to operate transit service. Agencies who do not receive 5311 funds may voluntarily report their data for potential inclusion for future funding. Chapter 53 of Title 49 states that the Secretary shall award a grant under Section 5311 only if the applicant and any person that will receive benefits directly from the grant are subject to the reporting and uniform systems. This states that by receiving 5311 funding, you're required to report to the NTD. The NTD data goes into these apportionment formulas for rural and tribal funding. The NTD data is used in determining these amounts along with being used for performance benchmarking, academic research, conditions and performance reports, and for the Government Performance Results Act. These are reporting deadlines for NTD reporters. As this was announced last year, if your fiscal year ends between January 1st and June 30th, the NTD report will now be due on October 31st. Please note that this will be the first year with the due date rather than November 30th as in previous years, and will be doing so for the subsequent report years. If it ends between July 1st and September 30th, it will be due on January 31st, and if it ends between October 1st and December 31st, it is due by April 30th. Next, we are going to discuss the changes coming for this report year. Updates to the USOA were first announced in October of 2016, and those NTD requirements are now being implemented this report year. These changes are intended to clarify reporting concepts and increase the quality of the data being reported. Please refer to the USOA document listed here and on our website for clarification on reporting. Please note that the ISFD or Independent Auditor Statement for Financial Data requirement does not apply to state DOTs and their subrecipients. It is only for urban, reduced, and full reporters. In addition, please note that rural reporters will report their financial information on the RR20 instead of the full reporter financial forms like the F10 that may be listed. There are a couple changes to the RR20 form for this report year, and they are as follows. Reporting on the fare revenues by the specific type is being passenger paid or organizational paid, but we will still report a total amount of the fare revenues being expended, the removal of the donations line item, and the removal of the contract revenues line item. As mentioned first, the fares will be split in between two classes. The passenger paid fares are the fares paid by the riders that come aboard the transit vehicle. Some examples are full adult fares or senior citizen fares. Secondly, we have organizational paid fares, which will now capture fares earned from organizations for providing transit service. This, for example, includes any sort of university paying an amount for their students to ride fare-free. Secondly, the change mentioned was moving of the donations field on the RR20. Donations will now be reported to other directly generated funds. The other directly generated funds field will also include insurance recoveries instead of being netted out, which will include payouts, rebates, or any funds that may be netted out toward future bills. In addition, please note that donations that are made on the transit vehicle will still be considered fare revenue. Lastly, this year there will be no contract revenue field. Funds that you previously reported to this field will now be reported to revenues accrued through a PT agreement or other directly generated funds. If the contract is a full cost contract, you will report the funds to the revenues accrued through the Purchase Transportation Agreement field. If it is a partial cost contract where your agency is unable to report the original source of the funding, you will report this to the Other Directly Generated Funds field. Another change for this year is the asset inventory reporting is being required. State DOTs are required to sponsor a group TAM plan for all Chapter 53 funding subrecipients, and they must report a condition assessment and performance targets. Note that the assets are now being reported when they enter revenue service and not when they arrive on the transit property. Here we can take a look at the transit asset management phase-in schedule. Everything that you see highlighted here in the Report Year 18 field will be required on your due date, which includes the internal targets, condition of vehicles, and condition of 1/4 of your facilities. Please note that if you have 3 or fewer facilities, you must report the condition of 1 facility. The two most common modes in the rural module are the motor bus and the man response modes. Motor bus must be reported if the agency operates any routes, route deviations, point deviations, or deviated fixed routes. Point deviations do not follow any specific or fixed route. Instead, the drivers will stop at bus stops at scheduled times. The buses can travel to any destination to pick up passengers until the next scheduled bus stop. This type of service does not follow a fixed route because the path is determined based on the origins and destinations of the passengers. This is different from deviated fixed route services, which operate buses along a fixed route with fixed predetermined times. But the buses may depart from the route to go to a specific location to collect or drop off passengers. An example of this can include traveling to a residence or an employment location, where the bus will then return to the route and continue to provide regular service. Then there is the man response service, which is scheduled in response to calls from passengers to the transit agency, who then dispatch a vehicle to pick up those passengers and transport them to their destination. Please remember that this service should always attempt to group passengers when they are able to. Along with being an on-demand service, many systems use this to meet ADA requirements. As noted below, to make modal changes or updates, you can go to the P20 form on the profile, which is then located under the Related Actions tab. NTD follows accrual accounting principles. What that means is that revenues are recorded when they are earned, regardless of whether or not the receipt of revenue takes place in the same reporting period. So if a passenger purchases $10 worth of fare, but only uses $5 at that moment, the agency will report the $5, which is how much they used at the time. And expenses are recorded when the liability occurs, regardless of when the payment is made. We'll be going over this a little bit more later in the presentation. Following the accrual accounting path, total expenses will be broken down between two types: operating and capital. Operating expenses are day-to-day expenses related to operating and maintaining vehicles, equipment, and buildings, along with any general admin costs. Some examples of these operating costs are fuel for the vehicles and salary, wages, or benefits for the transit-related employees, along with the rest that are listed here. For agencies with multiple modes, some expenses are hard to trace back to a specific mode. So if an agency operates more than one mode, the total amount of operating expense must be reported as direct and indirect by mode. Direct expenses need to be reported to a particular mode, and these can include bus passes or labor or fuel costs. And indirect expenses, like maintenance costs for shared vehicles or building maintenance costs, need to be determined aside from the direct expense. Once the direct expenses have been identified, they can be allocated between modes involved based on a reliable service data point like vehicle revenue miles. Capital expenses are related to the purchase of transit equipment like vehicles or maintenance facilities. This means non-expendable personal property that has a useful life of over 1 year, or acquisition costs of over $5,000, or the capitalization level established by your organization. If you have a capital expense where both modes utilize that asset, please report the capital expense to the mode that the asset supports the majority of the time. One thing to review is the capital assistance spent on operations field on the RR20 form, which is shown here. This field should be reported upon when capital funding is spent on activities that are considered operating, such as preventative maintenance and/or the purchase of tires. Please make sure to report this amount separately from the 5311 operating funding in the line item above, as these will typically have different matching requirements. Here you will see a few reference materials that are very resourceful in terms of reporting guidance and terminology. These include our glossary and user guide. These can all be found on our website in the manual section. We also have the USOA document that outlines the basic accounting structure all NTD reporters must follow, which can also be found on our website at the URL listed. Along with the previous reference materials, we have updated and created the 2018 Policy Manual and Asset Inventory Reporting Guide. These include detailed guidance and definitions, and we have also included the Transit Asset Management Guidebook, which is available that details the methods for transit agencies regarding the TAM facility assessments. This can be found by using the URL below. We will now touch on the asset inventory reporting that will be included in this report year. One of the main questions surrounding the new asset inventory module is who does this apply to? This applies to all Chapter 53 recipients that own, operate, or manage capital assets used in providing public transportation. All existing agencies that receive 5307 and 5311 are included in this and must report. Agencies that only receive 5310, 5339, or some other Chapter 53 funding report if they operate public transportation. As a reminder, public transportation is regular, continuing, shared ride transportation service that is open to the general public or open to a segment of the public defined by age, disability, or low income. Recipients of Chapter 5310 B1D funds for alternative to public transportation that assist persons with disabilities with transportation are exempt from the TAM requirement because these assets funded through this program are not used for public transportation. For example, Agency A provides services for persons with disabilities. Agency A receives 5310 B1D program funds and uses these funds to provide transportation services for their clients. They are exempt from the TAM rule because the 5310 B1D funded assets are used to provide client-based transportation services instead of public transportation. Please note that recipients and subrecipients of 5310 B1D that also receive Section 5307 or Section 5311 funds are required to comply with the requirements of the TAM rule due to the 5311 and 5307 reporting requirements. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact your analyst or review the TAM FAQ page. Any direct recipient of Chapter 53 funds which passes along some or all of those funds to subrecipients that own or operate capital assets used in public transportation must sponsor a group TAM plan on behalf of any of its subrecipients that are not 5307 direct recipients themselves. This rule applies mostly to state DOTs who pass along funds to their subrecipients. To review the tier thresholds, there are two tiers when it comes to TAM reporting. Tier 1 agencies must meet one of the three criteria that are listed here, and Tier 2 agencies must meet one of the criteria listed, where we mostly see RGPT 5311 subrecipients or American Indian tribes. The main criteria to be a participant in the state plan is that agencies must be Tier 2 in order to participate. Some may already be reporting to NTD in the form of an urban agency who will be an independent participant, or a rural agency that reports much like previous years. Independent participants already report to NTD directly and will report their asset forms, the A15, A30, and A35, on their own behalf. The group plan sponsor will only have viewing access to these asset forms and will be only completing the A90 on their behalf, which is where their data will be pulled into for performance measures. Other agencies participating may be new to NTD in the form of managed participants. These managed participants are only reporting their asset data, which in most cases will be done by the sponsor. Reminder that these managed participants will be submitted along with the annual package. Next, we are going to review the NTD interface and user management accounts within the system. To access our website, please go to transit.dot.gov/NTD. Here you will find links to our manuals previously mentioned and a link to our reporting system on the right-hand side. When you log in, the newsfeed will be the first page that you see. You'll see status and report updates from the NTD personnel posted here. The Tasks tab will have tasks assigned to the CEOs, the CEO delegates, and NTD contacts. These are usually related to completing the report kickoffs at the beginning of the year, or if certain pages are left unsaved or incomplete. Agency reporting forms and profile information are accessed through the Records tab. This is the most commonly used tab in the NTD system, as it directs users to the annual report packages as well as the agency profiles. As mentioned previously, reporter profiles are going to be accessed through the Records tab, and this section contains agency data that typically does not change from year to year. This can be such as basic information like the agency address or DUNS number, the reporter modes, where agencies report the modes and type of service that they operate, and the users on the profile that will be filling out the report. The e-file library stores communication logs, documentation, and other correspondences between agencies and NTD. You can filter through these items based on a particular report year that you're looking for, or the type of correspondence, for example, a waiver request. Or you can filter on the status of the correspondence, that is to say, items that are accepted, rejected, or under review. The form library stores historical NTD reports from previous report years that you're able to download. Again, this is information that can be found under your agency's profile sections. The Related Actions tab will allow you to view basic information, reporter modes, reporter users, and allows you to print previous report year reports along with managing your transit asset sponsor. Here we're going to be covering the process of getting NTD users set up in the system, as well as establishing agency user managers. This is for agencies who are new to NTD, or who are new to the NTD system, or for existing agencies who experience turnover and need to establish a new user manager to their profile. Every agency must send FTA an official letter designating an employee as the agency's user manager, which allows you to create accounts for the multiple users on the profile. The user manager can also fill an entity role. For example, the CEO can also be the agency's user manager. Information on this can be found on our website through the user guide that is listed here. In addition, please note that agencies can have more than one user manager on their profile, but must send an official letter for each user manager that they request. Here you're going to see all the permissions that each NTD user role entails. The CEO and CEO delegates can create a report of requests, such as a waiver request or an extension request, and they can also create, review, and edit all forms and issues, and they can submit their annual report package on the first go-round, as well as any subsequent submission. The CEO can also create a request to add a CEO delegate for approval. Next, the NTD contact can view and edit all forms and issues, as well as submit the annual report package after the first submission. Editors can only view and edit all forms and issues, and viewers may only view the current data and any issues. If you get to our reporting system and do not remember your password, you can click the Forgot Password button on the main screen. You will receive an automated email generated from the system that will allow you to create a new password. Please remember that the password link will expire within 15 minutes, or you'll have to redo the process. After 60 days of inactivity in the system, user accounts will lock, and the system will send an automated email alerting the user that their account has been locked. Prior to your account locking, you should receive lockout warning emails 15, 10, and 5 days before the system does so. If this happens, there are two methods to unlock your account. First, the user can answer security questions to unlock their account. So you can only do this if you have set up your security questions previously. You'll log in and go to the Actions tab at the top and select Answer Security Questions, and the access will be restored once the correct answers are submitted. Secondly, if you have not set up your security questions or simply can't remember the answers, you should request to be unlocked. To do this, you're going to click Actions at the top and select Request to be unlocked. You will confirm your username, which is your email address, and submit the request. The request will appear as a task for the user manager of your agency. The user manager will open a task and unlock the user, but if the user manager is locked out, follow up with your analyst for further processing. To create your security questions, you will navigate to your user profile dropdown at the top right of the screen. Select Profile, then Related Actions. Under Related Actions, you will choose Manage Security Questions, and then complete the form. Subrecipients of a state have the ability to report their information themselves rather than through the state DOT. This allows subrecipients to enter and edit their own data within the NTD system. The functionality is completely optional to utilize. Note that this can be done for some, none, or all of the subrecipients chosen. It does not have to be an all or none type of change. This will allow them to just save and validate the forms, but not submit the report. Submitting will still be up to the state, and the state is responsible for all the information reported. If granted, the subrecipient should go through the state contact for assistance rather than straight to the NTD analyst. If chosen to self-report, the subrecipient will need to submit a user manager letter for an account within the system, as they are subject to the user management requirements. These letters should be sent from the state contact to their assigned analyst when completed, rather than sent directly from the subrecipient. The analyst will create the account, and the new user should be able to log in for the first time by going through the forgotten password process that we mentioned previously. Now we're going to cover the first step related to the NTD annual report, which starts with the completion of the report year kickoff task. The report year kickoff process officially launches the upcoming report year for your agency. So as soon as your fiscal year ends, the CEO and NTD contact will receive a task to complete this kickoff. Once completed, your report package forms will generate. From the news feed, select the Task tab and accept the task, then click Proceed to start the report year kickoff. You're able to reassign the task to another user if you choose to do so. The first step is to update your agency users. Please ensure that all contact information is accurate and up to date, and that appropriate users are designated to the correct roles. Again, please note that only user managers can add new users or deactivate existing users. The next step is to add or edit subrecipients. The subrecipients from the previous report year are going to be preloaded. Please remember to add any new subrecipients during your kickoff, and note that any new subrecipients can be added during this process. If you have already kicked off and need to add a subrecipient, you can add them from the state report package screen under related actions. Next, we will assign the type for the subrecipients. Like previously, the type is going to be preloaded from the previous report year. You can change the type from the drop-down menu named Subrecipient Type that is shown here. Prior to changing a subrecipient type from Rural General Public Transit to another, please consult this change with your analyst to discuss and confirm the change. Next, in the kickoff process is setting up your TAN plan participants, as you will be required to do so during this step. Of the subrecipients, the RGPT subs will be checked off automatically. If you have a reduced asset reporters who are only reporting their asset information, it will preset as checked without the ability to edit. To actually assign self-reporting subrecipients, this is the page that will allow you to select the subrecipient checkbox. That will allow you to select the subrecipients in the checkbox to the left. Once all these are selected, you can finish the kickoff. After completing the kickoff process, the reporting forms may take up to 3 minutes to generate. You should be able to click OK to end the task. And like I said, within 3 minutes, you should be able to go to Records, into your report packages, and access your report. Next, we're going to discuss completing the 2018 report, which includes the forms, issues, and validation process. As mentioned, to get to the report packages, select Records, then into the report packages. Select your state package to review all the subrecipient packages, or select an individual package that you want to edit. Select Subrecipient Reports to view all reports and select the one you would like to work on. You can select the heading to sort by subrecipient, subrecipient type, or the amount of total or open issues. Once you select the subrecipient to work on, click the Annual Forms button on the top right to bring up all the forms. To open a specific form for the agency, select the hyperlinked form name and open and edit the form. Next, we're going to discuss the different types of subrecipients that will be listed within the state's package report. The main type of subrecipient we have is Rural General Public Transit. This type is for an agency that provides rural service and benefits from 5311 funding or is reporting through the useful life of a 5311 funded asset. Please note that this means that the state may be required to provide reports on 5311 subrecipients that did not receive any 5311 funds during the current year. They are required to complete all forms listed, which we will cover shortly. The next type is a reduced asset reporter. This reporter type benefits from funding that is not 5311 or 5307 and owns, manages, or operates assets funded by FTA that are used in public transit. An example of this would be a 5310 provider that operates public transportation. These reporters will have a smaller package of forms that include the standard B10 identification form, along with the 3 asset forms, the A15, the A30, and A35. Another subrecipient some of you may be familiar with are the urban/tribal subrecipients. These can either be an urban reporter that directly reports to NTD that provides urban service or benefits from 5311, or secondly, they can be an American Indian tribe that performs rural service who directly reports to NTD as well. Since these agencies already directly report to NTD, the state submits an abbreviated report that includes their B10 information and the amount of 5311 that was expended during the fiscal year. Lastly, there are intercity bus subrecipients. These are providers that schedule bus service to the general public that operate with limited stops between 2 urbanized areas, connect a rural area to an urbanized area, or has the capacity to transport luggage. They will too have an abbreviated report that includes the B10 information and an abbreviated RR20 that includes 5311 funds expended, vehicle revenue miles, and unlinked passenger trips. Please note that these vehicle revenue miles and unlinked passenger trips should be when providing 5311 services. Now I'm going to hand the rest of the presentation off to Bailey Krouse so she can discuss the different report forms.
Thank you, Erik. Now we'll be discussing how to complete the required forms as we mentioned in the NTD report. The first form we'll talk about is the Basic Information or B10 form, which contains an agency's organization type and fiscal year. Okay. You'll be able to edit the data from the summary page by using the drop-down to select the organization type. The common organization types include area agencies on aging, private nonprofit corporations, or a city or county department of transportation. Please remember to enter the fiscal year end date of which the data is being reported on. When finished, you will select Save and Validate. The Stations and Maintenance Facilities form, or A10 form, captures the type and number of maintenance facilities utilized for the provision of public transportation. These assets are reported based on the capacity and ownership types. Agencies must complete one A10 form per mode and type of service. You can see that facilities are categorized by ownership type along the top row. If one facility is shared by 2 or more modes, you may report a prorated share based on the number of vehicles it services. For example, a subrecipient owns one facility that operates a demand response and fixed route bus service. Both modes share the facility and they own 20 vehicles total. The demand response mode runs 15 vehicles and the bus mode runs 5. In this example, we'd expect to see 0.75 reported in the demand response form and 0.25 on the bus form. Please note that if you do use this prorated method, the sum of all facilities should always be a whole number. All right, so the next form is going to be the A15 form. This will collect basic information on the facilities that are used to supply the public transit service and is a required form going forward. If your agency does not have any facilities and just leases them as mentioned on the A10, the form just needs to be saved and validated as blank. As a note, if you do save it as blank, during validation you will be asked to confirm that the form was meant to be left blank. This will just be a one-year thing though, so that way going forward we understand where your facilities are and where they're not. So, on this form you will report the administrative and maintenance facilities for which you have capital responsibility for. However, you will report passenger and parking facilities regardless of your capital responsibility for them. We will mention capital responsibility a lot with regards to the expanded asset module. Please see the list here to determine whether or not your agency has direct capital responsibility for an asset. As a note, for number 3, an infrastructure asset itemized as a capital line item in the budget does not necessarily mean an agency has direct capital responsibility. An agency must also have management or oversight responsibilities for the line item project. In addition, performing minimal preventative maintenance work doesn't necessarily indicate capital responsibility. I will be saying capital responsibility a lot, just as an FYI. Okay, examples of the types of facilities reported are administrative buildings, combined administrative and maintenance facilities, and maintenance facilities. Examples of administrative activities include accounting, finance, engineering, customer services, scheduling, and planning. If the agency has an owned facility on the A10, we would expect them to have a facility entered on this form. As mentioned in the slide, more types are available and found in the NTD Policy Manual on page 82. To fill out the A15, you will first click on the Add Facility link. This will allow you to enter data in 3 sections: Facilities Information, Condition Assessment, and Address. We will now go over what is in each section. All right, so in the Facility section, you will fill out the name of the facility that the agency uses for it, the primary mode of services, such as demand response or bus, any secondary mode that it may service, if it services a private mode in addition to the public modes, the type of facility you are reporting, the year it was built or reconstructed as new, the square footage. If it holds parking, it will allow you to enter how many parking spaces it has. Once again, the capital responsibility the agency has towards the facility in percentage form. This is important, percentage form. And if there are any notes you would like to add. As mentioned previously, if you do select the combined administrative and maintenance facility, please enter a note explaining the functionality of that same facility. After entering all applicable data, please click Continue. I'm just going to go ahead and answer the chat pod really quick. For the AIM forms, if you are part of a TAM plan, follow whatever they're saying to you. For NTD reporting, we may have them named differently. However, what we're saying in this one are the ones that you need to fill out for NTD specifically. So you can always check in with us after this just to make sure, you know, what exactly we're talking about with these forms. All right, so jumping back in the next section of the A15, you will fill out the condition assessment, which will be an integer value of 1 through 5, as well as an estimated date of the condition assessment, which could be when it was built or when it was reassessed. And the name of the facility will of course carry over from the first section, and the ID will be assigned once you save. Okay. So the last section is the address section. You will enter the full address, and once finished with all the sections, you will click on Continue. You do have the option to enter either the the address or the lat long. The lat long, sometimes if you don't put the negative sign, it will go across the world. So if you have the address, put the address in. All right, so last step of the A15 is saving and validating. As soon as you click on continue from the last section, you'll be sent back to the summary page of that same form. From here, you can save and validate, or edit the facility you just entered by clicking on the name of the facility or checking off the radio button next to it and clicking on Edit Selected. Okay, moving on to the next form, the A30, or Revenue Vehicle Inventory, should be pretty familiar with, is where you report all the revenue vehicle inventory data. You'll categorize vehicles in fleets, identify basic vehicle information, and report the funding and ownership type for all revenue vehicles. Remember, revenue vehicles are those that are transporting passengers. Right, so if your subrecipient completed the form last year, 2017 data will pre-populate into this year's form. You will only need to report any new fleets or edit existing fleets. If you are new to NTD reporting, you will enter all the vehicle information manually. You may either click Add Fleet at the bottom to report a new fleet, or select an existing fleet by clicking Edit Fleet. All right, to go through a couple new things, the agency fleet ID was added last year to assist in understanding what vehicles belong to what fleet, so you could enter VIN, you could enter whatever the agency calls that fleet. Another was the No Capital Responsibility checkbox, which is now required. So you will select the No Capital Responsibility if your agency has no capital responsibility for the fleet. Checking off this box will remove the requirement for reporting a useful life benchmark for that fleet. And then, of course, there is the area below where you can enter notes on the fleet as applicable. No capital responsibility is either is at the agency level. So if you're a state and you're saying, well, the state doesn't have capital responsibility towards it, don't think of it that way. Think of, does the agency have capital responsibility towards it? If they do, leave it unchecked, enter ULB. Excellent. All right, so below the note section of the below the note section will be the useful life benchmark section, which is also required for this year for all fleets that does not have that handy-dandy no capital responsibility check mark off. You will need to fill out this information for all existing fleets. FTA has outlined a default useful life benchmark for each vehicle type, but transit agencies may adjust as applicable. Once the ULB is filled out, the useful life remaining years will be updated automatically. Again, revenue vehicles carry passengers. They're not the service vehicles as found on the A35. Please feel free to save and validate, or save this form as you go through it, and then at the end, save and validate. Of course, everything checks green, you're good to go. Saving does assign that RVI ID if the fleet was newly added this year. Okay, I want to take a moment to review the data element manufacture year. The manufacture year is when the vehicle was built. This may not match the model year. If you have historically reported the model year, please go back and report the manufacture year for all vehicles, as this helps determine the correct useful life benchmark of the fleet and the useful life remaining years. Sorry, I know I'm talking a little fast. We have a lot to go. Okay, let's see here. A common question we receive is, what is the difference between active and inactive vehicles? Transit agencies must report the number of active vehicles in the fleet as well as of the end of the fiscal year. Active vehicles provide regular service and include spare vehicles. Inactive vehicles are awaiting sale or disposal, are in storage, or are part of an FTA-approved emergency contingency plan, or, of course, are out for major repairs and will not be back in service. Okay, following up on the previous slide, please remember to retire fleets that are no longer in service rather than deleting them. Fleets should only be deleted if they were added to the mode incorrectly. To retire a fleet, you will update the active vehicles to 0. Once that occurs, the question, is this fleet retired, will appear, and you will select yes. These are some common validation issues we see during the report year. If you indicate a vehicle fleet is used for another mode, please make sure to use the Add Existing Fleet button to copy over the data to the other mode as needed. If you report a new vehicle on the A30, we would expect to see corresponding capital funding in your financial data unless there are special circumstances. You must complete all the fields on the A30 without leaving anything blank. If you do so, you will not be able to save and validate. All right, so next form, A35 is also required starting this report year. If your agency does not have any service vehicles, the form needs to be saved and validated as blank. Once again, if you leave it as blank during validation, you will be asked to confirm that the form is meant to be left blank, exactly like the A15. The A35 collects data on different types of service vehicles used to indirectly deliver transit service and maintain revenue vehicles. Agencies are required to report on fleets for which they have capital responsibility. Service vehicles are defined in the slide and include cars used for admin staff, transit police cars, and tow trucks. However, agencies should not report small forklifts and golf carts. This form will work the same way as the A15. To create a fleet, you will select Add New. The first section is the service fleet information, and it includes the fleet name, which will be what the agency calls it, the agency's fleet ID associated with the vehicle, the primary mode, any secondary modes, type of vehicle, number of vehicles, the useful life benchmark of the vehicle, manufacturer year, and notes. There are 3 types of service vehicles: automobiles, truck, and other rubber-tired vehicles, and steel wheel vehicles. If your agency has more than one mode, the primary mode should be the mode that the fleet vehicles service the most, and this is at the agency's discretion. The second and final section of the A15 is the financial area. The fleet name and fleet ID will carry over from the first section. Then, the agency will fill out the transit agency capital responsibility in percentage form again, the estimated cost, and the year dollars of estimated cost. Estimated costs will include stock costs, such as finance charges. This will be the most recent estimate of the full cost to replace the asset. If you do not have a recent estimate, you can report the original cost of the asset or its insured value. In regards to the year, if you do not have a recent estimate and do not know the insured value, and you report the original cost of the asset, you report the year that you purchased the asset. If you have an insured value from your last fiscal year, you would report the year that it corresponds to. When all the information is entered and you are back on the summary page, you will click on Save and Validate, and the form will work exactly like the A15. All right, so now we are on to the Reduced Reporting, or RR20 form, which contains the highest volume of data in the NTD report. This is also the last form in the RGPT report package. When you open up the RR20, the total funds expended by funding type at the top is the non-editable running total of the funding you're entering. This should match the manually entered total funds expended by mode and type of service in most instances before you submit your forms, which are seen here circled in red. As a reminder, finances should be reported as revenues expended, not earned. Grant awards may be larger than the amount actually expended during the report year. When reporting financials, please report the original source of funds which were spent and reimbursed. The example here explains that if you receive a grant for $750,000 but only spend $300,000, you would report the $300,000 on your NTD report. Fare revenues include all income received and expended directly from passengers. This can come in a variety of forms like cash, prepaid tickets, reduced or subsidized fares, and donations. Donations made on board a transit vehicle at the fare box should be classified as fare revenue, and that's what I mean by donations. Again, as Erik mentioned earlier, fare revenues are now broken out between passenger paid and organization paid fares. If you have more than one mode, you are required to capture and report the fares by mode and type of service. There are some exceptions to this requirement as listed here, and if your agency is an exception to the rule, please make sure to make your analyst aware of this during validation so that we can note it for future report years. Going in order of the forms, here are some examples of other directly generated funds. In addition, this is where the donations that are not made on board the vehicle and insurance recoveries will be reported. Please note that this will include non-full cost contracts. Right. Below that is the revenue accrued through a PT agreement. Those will be reported if you receive revenues from another agency or non-NTD agency that pays for the full cost of a service you provide, as long as it meets the NTD definition of purchase transportation. Below the directly generated funding section lies the non-federal funding section. Enter the data accordingly based on what funds came from local funds, state funds, or other non-federal sources. Again, please be sure to report these funds based on operating and capital expenses. Local sources include tax levies, general funds, and finances from local entities. State sources include, but are not limited to, state programs that support public transit and state portions of Medicaid. These do not include the Chapter 53 funds that a state may pass through to a subrecipient. The next section, you'll select all applicable federal funding sources from the list of programs. The various FTA programs are broken down in detail. If the subrecipient expended funds from other federal grant programs, they would select other federal funds, other FTA funds, or other USDOT funds. These selections will require a comment to describe the type of funding. If you select other, in any circumstance, you will need to comment as to what it is. All right, examples of other FTA funds include those not listed already, such as Section 5308, FTA Clean Fuels Program. Examples of other federal funds may include HUD, but the most common type of funding that is reported is federal Medicaid. After the financial section and saving the data as you go, you will then enter all resource, service, and safety data. A common error is to leave the reportable incidents and or the volunteer resources blank. If you do not have any volunteer drivers or vehicles, please make sure they are filled out with zeros, and the same will go for the safety data. For service data, the miles and hours reported should only include revenue service, which is when the vehicles are transporting passengers or are able to transport passengers. This will include layover and recovery times. Revenue service does not include deadhead, driver training, school bus or charter services, and vehicle maintenance. As mentioned in the previous slide, deadhead includes miles and hours that a vehicle travels when out of revenue service. This will include leaving or returning to the garage or yard facility, changing routes, or when there is no expectation of carrying passengers. There are detailed tables found within NTD policy manual which further clarifies what is revenue service for each mode. When reporting unlinked passenger trips, please include all passengers. These passengers are usually classified as regular and or sponsored. Passengers will be counted each time they board the vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to their destination. I cannot stress enough that the unlinked passenger trip should include regular and sponsored trips. All right, sponsored trips, which once again are part of the unlinked passenger trip number being reported, are trips that are paid for in part or in full by a third party. These may be part of a coordinated human services transportation plan. Common sponsors are the VA, Medicare, and assisted living centers. So these would be when one of these sponsored trips through the agency. All right, vehicles operated in annual maximum service, or VOMS, are the number of vehicles an agency operates to meet the annual maximum service requirement. VOMS are counted during the peak season of the year on the busiest day, but you will want to exclude atypical days. It is a snapshot of one time how many vehicles are on the road at once. All right, an example of how revenue service is reported is seen here. Bob's Dial-A-Ride departs from the garage at 10:45 and drives 3 miles to a pickup point. He gets there at 11 o'clock and 5 passengers board the vehicle at 11:05. He then drives with the passengers for 3 miles and gets there at 11:15. The data that would result from this example would be 3 vehicle revenue miles, 0.25 vehicle revenue hours, and 5 unlinked passenger trips. After completing the revenue service section, the safety data is the last item on that RR20 form. Reportable incidents include fatalities, injuries, or property damages that exceeds $25,000, collisions involving revenue vehicles that require towing away from the scene of the incident, or an evacuation for life safety reasons. Fatalities are reported when death occurs within 30 days of an incident, and injuries are reported when passengers are immediately transported away from the scene for medical attention. Next, I would like to go over some common questions and validation issues we see as analysts. Some common validation issues we see with service data are agencies reporting their service's scheduled hours or the driver's availability rather than the actual vehicle revenue hours, calculating vehicle revenue miles based on routes using Google Maps or some other method, or including deadhead in revenue service such as the examples listed here. Again, if you're ever unsure of whether certain aspects of your service are reportable or not, please feel free to contact your analyst or consult the NTD policy manual. Another common issue we see on the RR20 is related to financial totals not matching. Once you report the total funds expended and then break down that total by funding source, the sum of all the different funding sources should exactly match the funds, or total funds expended. Another issue is that the number of vehicles operated in annual maximum service, VOMS, is higher than the number of active vehicles reported on the A30 form. Active vehicles should be equal to or higher than VOMS in most cases. And finally, do not report more sponsored unlinked passenger trips than total unlinked passenger trips. As I mentioned before, your total passenger count should include sponsored trips, and you report the sponsored trips independently in a different field. Okay, some common questions that we receive about validation are ratio questions. When your analyst is reviewing your report, we are looking at how data points change from year to year, as well as how the data as a whole changes year to year. We include ratios such as cost per hour, which is the mode's cost divided by the same mode's vehicle revenue hours, to see how an agency may have changed. An example of an explanation could be that your agency had an increase in preventative maintenance costs from one year to the next while the hours maintained. If you ever have questions about validation issues, please feel free to reach out to your analyst for further detail. All right, Erik mentioned earlier the intercity bus subrecipient type and what forms they report. To follow up on that, if an intercity bus agency only expends 5311 funds for planning purposes or capital projects and does not expend the funds for operations, you will not need to complete the VRM and UPT sections of the RR20. You would just need to report the 5311 financial information. If a route is only partially funded by the 5311 program, you will report all of the miles and ridership for that same route. You will not need to separate the 5311 funded portions of the route for NTD reporting purposes. Okay, another subrecipient type Erik mentioned earlier is the urban/tribal subrecipient. These are agencies that already report to NTD directly and may receive or benefit from 5307 funding. The most common kind of validation issue we see with these kind of subrecipients is the 5311 amount reported in the state's report doesn't match what the directly reporting agency has on their report. If the state and subrecipient report on the same fiscal year end period, these amounts should match. Additionally, tribes can receive 5311 state funding in addition to 5311 tribal transit funds. But states should only report those funds that the state awarded the tribe, so please make sure to exclude any tribal transit 5311 funds from the tribal subrecipient report. Okay, the state also has some forms they need to fill out on behalf of themselves. One of those is the RU30 for statewide characteristics. There are 2 data points states will fill out on this form: the 5311 expended on state admin, which is the amount of 5311 funding that the state spent on administering the program, and the number of counties with 5311 service, which is the total number of counties that are currently served in part or in whole by a 5311 funded operator. This number should include all counties in addition, or include counties that are served by tribes that receive 5311 funding regardless of whether or not it's from the state. Okay, the second form that the state report on behalf of themselves is the Transit Asset Management Performance Measures Target Form, or A90, which is required starting this year for those that are a TAM group plan sponsor. The A90 is where agencies report the portion of their assets that have met or exceeded the ULB set. They will compare the current year targets to live data pulled from the asset forms of the plan. Only the group plan sponsor will complete this form. You may see that your subrecipients have a viewable A90 in their package, but it will not be editable and it will not be part of their editing package that is seen above. The first section of the A90 will include the rolling stock, and as you can see, they are grayed out sections under the 2018 target percentage. This means that there are no vehicles being reported that fall under those types, and the NA is selected. Please report targets for all applicable vehicle types. The next section contains the equipment targets. This report is based on the 3 vehicle types on the A35. You'll fill out this section the same way as the first section. The third section contains the facility targets, and you will be reporting the percentage of facilities that rate below a 3 on the condition scale. And the last item on the A90 is the narrative report, which will be uploaded and required in report year 2019. The narrative report will outline performance targets and your agency's progress towards those targets. This may include any changes within the transit system. After you completed all the reports for the subrecipients in the state, you will need to submit the report within the NTD system. You will do this by clicking on Related Actions from the state's report summary page. Please note that only the CEO or CEO delegate can submit the original submission or first draft of the NTD report, and the NTD contact can submit all subsequent revisions. When in Related Actions, select Submit Annual Report Package. If there are any open issues, non-safe forms, or missing required data points, you will not be able to submit the report. You'll want to go to that subrecipient's package and complete the requirements to resolve any issues. If all data is filled out and there are no issues preventing you from submitting, like incomplete forms mentioned in the previous slide, this page will appear, and you will click Continue. The next page, you will click on Submit. After successfully submitting the report package, you will see a yellow notification box saying Action Completed Successfully. If you want to confirm that the report package was completely submitted, refer back to the state's report package summary page. The report should be listed as in review rather than working data if it is on the analyst's desk. Once you submit the report, there are a couple more steps that need to be taken in order to completely close out the report for the year. Your assigned NTD analyst will review the entire report for accuracy and consistency. They will compare the data submitted this year to data submitted last year for any significant changes, as well as ensure that all data was reported to the correct fields. Analysts are available for contact prior to report submission for any questions or concerns you may have, and please feel free to reach out to them if you are unsure of any reporting requirements. They will be also sending you a couple helpful materials before the report launch, and I hope everyone's already reached out to you. And this will include a checklist with important submission items like the ones we discussed today. If the report is sent back for any additional information or data correction, the analyst will establish a timeline for resubmitting the report. If the report needs multiple revisions, the time frame will lessen each time. If your agency had any issues cited in the closeout letter in the previous year, please make sure to advise whether or not the issue has been resolved and any additional information. Failure to do so may result in the data being marked as questionable. Notes in the closeout letter typically relate to incomplete reports, which could mean either the data does not conform with NTD definitions, accounting principles, or accrual accounting, or it could mean that the agency did not adequately respond to validation issues raised by the analyst. All identified issues must be fully addressed in order for the issue to be resolved. The best way to resolve validation issues is to provide solid and detailed explanations that give your analyst a clear picture of the service. Explain why the data changed from year to year, what service changes took place to cause a significant shift in the data. If you find that last year's data was incorrect, please provide an explanation as to why it was wrong and why this year's data is correct, in addition to the corrected numbers for the prior year. Please note that FTA does not accept this explanation for multiple years. As we continue in report year 2018, your analyst should be in contact with you. They are here to guide you through the submission and validation process, so please do not hesitate to get in touch with them if you have any questions. Here's the contact information for our team, as well as the NTD Help Desk line. It is open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to working with you all. And now we will take some time to go over any remaining questions.
If anyone has any questions, please type it in the chat box. It looks like they've been answered as we go along. I'll accept the last few. Was Renee's question answered?
So for the question about the medical trip reimbursement, if it's state Medicaid reimbursement, we're going to report those funds under state funds. And if it's federal Medicaid reimbursement, we're going to be reporting that under other federal funds, and we'll just describe that out in the description box. And they will be reported as sponsored trips.
Great. And then after that, Lena asked, our agency is an urbanized area. Do I disregard RR-20?
Hi, Lena. I was wondering if you were a direct reporter to NTD with 5307 funding, or if you are a reduced asset reporter, like you were a 5310 public. If you are a 5310 public, you will only report the asset fund or the asset forms, and you will not report on the RR20. If you are an urban reporter with 5307 funding, you will report all the forms, in addition to maybe more if you are an urban full reporter. So those are the kind of rundown of the couple different reporter types you could be.
And under that, in the chat box, Tammy asked, should we be reporting the amount of the grant awarded to the subrecipient or the amount actually reimbursed during that year?
Great question, Tammy. You are going to be reporting the amount reimbursed, so the amount that was actually spent during that fiscal year, whichever fiscal year we're reporting on.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions? Now would be the time. Or later, if you have the email addresses. We'll just wait a minute and see if anyone starts typing. Renee is typing. Maybe Renee isn't even typing to us. Who knows? There we go. Renee says, just to clarify, the NEMT reimbursements that the agencies receive from contractors would be state Medicaid or contract revenue.
So it will depend on if the reimbursements are at a full cost or not a full. So if it's the full cost contract, it would be under purchase transportation or revenues accrued through a PT agreement that we talked about under the other directly generated funds. Otherwise, it will be from the original source, which would be those Medicaid funds.
Okay, anyone else? I'm going to wait a few seconds, see if anyone starts typing. Okay, I see some typing, so let's just wait. Lena wrote, in the answer to me, you said induction AIM. What is that?
So the start of the asset inventory module when it was first conceived. So the form names changed basically from when it was first to what we actually have right now.
And Renee, I see you're typing again, so we'll just wait. Renee asks, does full cost mean full fare reimbursement or the cost to operate the service?
The cost to operate the service. So the cost to operate the service for that specific ride, if that specific ride is covered at the full cost, then that would be a full cost ride.
Okay, last call. Going once. Going twice. Bailey, Eric, do you have anything you want to add before I wind this up?
Yeah, I just want to say that we got some really good questions, and I really appreciate everyone's minds working because we do receive these questions a lot. So thank you for asking them, and thank you for letting us explain this in this kind of format.
Great. Okay, so thank you everyone for participating in the webinar. Special thank you to Bailey and Erik for their time and the presentation. Everyone, you will be receiving an invitation to fill out an eval for this event survey. So if you could just take a couple minutes and do that, that would be wonderful. NTI really appreciates your feedback. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.